over the past 6 months, and just active membership is kind of dwindling. So, is it fair for us to solicit them? And then that leads into the second one, which is can we actually make it a requirement? You know that if you want to be on the early disclosure list, that you should also be a part of the Envoy early disclosure list. So yeah, that's just an open question to TOC.
Go ahead, Justin.
For the second one, I just wanted to provide a little bit more context. So the issue that came up is that when we do our CVE releases, a lot of them often contain Envoy releases. And so if we do an announcement for an Istio release that includes the Envoy, or sorry, for the early disclosure, if we do an early disclosure release and they're not members of the Envoy early release, then we're violating the Envoy embargo that we agreed to. So the reason we wanted to make that a requirement is that otherwise it's going to complicate our announcements for early disclosure.
I think that sounds reasonable to me.
Yeah, I think we should probably double check if the 3 people that are already on our list that are not Envoy for some reason can't get on the Envoy list. We should probably double check back in to see what we should do, but I'm guessing that they can just apply for it and they should be fine, and we don't have to worry about the repercussions of removing anyone. And for future people that are being added, I think it's a very reasonable requirement.
Yeah, seems reasonable.
Okay. So yeah, so I'll email them that as well as solicit them. I'm not hearing any feedback saying that it's that we can't do that. The last question, and this was from Oliver. Oliver, so over the past, I guess we've had reporters in the past ask us, if there's any bounties or swag or kind of anything for reporting some of these CVEs to us. Just kind of bringing that forward to TOC. Is there the possibility of doing that in the future, or should we bring that up to TSC, or should we just say that just thanks and contribution on the Istio website is the only thing that we have at this time, and we aren't evaluating other things. So
I'm actually a bit worried about providing rewards because I think that may encourage low effort reports, which we already get a decent amount of. And people reporting things like, oh, your Grafana dashboard's exposed, and it's like, well, we did that on purpose, and like your email is configured in a weird way, and that's not really a priority for us. I don't know if it will encourage someone to go find like some 10.0 CVE that's like core to Istio, and then we'll give them a reward, unless like we had substantial rewards that actually like promoted someone that actually to invest substantial time. But like I don't think a t-shirt or like kind of the lower effort rewards is going to provide any benefit to us. That makes sense. Like for example, Envoy has a reward and it's a real high cash reward, but they have a very, very, very isolated setup that you need to exploit. It's not like anything is game. And so I feel like something like that would be useful, but I don't know how we could actually set that up for Istio. So I would worry about what kind of reports that brings.
Yeah, I guess I could imagine some things like setup criteria like authorization bypass or something, or sort of a similar gauntlet that they have to pass in order to claim it. This may be a discussion more for Google, but I mean, I guess but it's related. Is how are people handling like cloud services? Like if someone found an exploit in Google Cloud, do we know if since we have a version of Istio, is there compensation available for that? Because then it could also create sort of weird things if there can be an incentive to report them in one place but not on another. Maybe we get the same end result, but still it might be seen as strange.
I do think, and I'm not certain of the details, but that Google Cloud does have such a thing. I don't know if they have a scope that would include or exclude Istio. I'm curious how other projects do it. Like, obviously Google offers like some MySQL database or something. Do we offer bounty on that? And does the open source MySQL offer a similar bounty, or vice versa? Or even Envoy itself, really, or Kubernetes? I don't know. I guess what is our goal of offering this reward? Like, are we trying to encourage more CVE reports? Are we trying to thank the ones that we already got? Or
Sorry, what you did.
Yeah, I guess the incentive would be that, there are security researchers in the world that may be focusing their efforts on like other projects, just because that's how, perhaps they pay their bills. And, to get a little bit more eyeballs into the Istio framework, to see if there's any other issues that are there. Now that's speculative, right? I don't know if people actually are looking at Istio right now. They may be, but they have been fruitful, obviously, for other projects, right? But other projects kind of may operate in a different way or have more visibility for people. So I'm not sure if it's necessarily like we would even see the benefits of actively doing this. Plus, I think you're right. The number of reports would go drastically up, or at least initially would go up, as kind of people see something, of this caliber.
But I mean, I think that the amount, if we're talking about giving a T-shirt or something, it's not going to really help a researcher. I guess it would just be more sort of like the swag that you get out at speaking at a conference, just sort of a recognition or a thank you. But yeah, I mean, it's not going to. I doubt that it's going to drive real security researchers to spend significant time on Istio.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks for the feedback. I think we had talked about this a while back, so yeah, just confirmation that this isn't the plan that we want to go to for now. So we can move on.
all right, Sam, are you here?
Yeah. Hey. So this is kind of a continuation of a discussion from the environments working group. Basically, we're calling for like a soft deprecation of the in-cluster operator installation and upgrade methods. We're not calling it a deprecation, and we're planning on continuing to fix bugs. The main difference here would be we are not going to recommend that new users use the in-cluster operator. We're going to kind of shove the docs somewhere more hidden, and basically put a warning on that installation page. In terms of the reasons, the maintenance burden for the working group has been pretty high, and there's less and less expertise on the in-cluster operator to fix bugs. And yeah, that's basically what we wanted to run through the TOC.
Yeah, I guess to me, there's really like two different aspects here. It's just the general concept of having a maintenance mode as kind of a state between an active feature and deprecated, where the difference being that deprecated implies that it's planned to be removed, whereas maintenance is just like we're not going to remove it, but we're also not actively supporting it as much as other features, which I think is going to be more and more important in Istio in general, because at this point, it's very, very hard to remove features now as we've gotten critical mass of users. I can't even think of any features that we could really remove at this point. And so I think like in the future, distant future, perhaps like things like virtual service and gateway may go into maintenance mode once the whole gateway API is fully stabilized and recommended. I'm sure other things will probably go down that route as well. So I think it's kind of a useful state to have. And in terms of the operator being the first one in that state, I totally agree.
Yeah, it seems pretty reasonable. I don't think we've documented maintenance mode as kind of a future state. So we probably want to go and expand on that a little bit. Do we expect to put this notice into the release notes for the next release?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll have to be very careful with the wording, though. Like, we want to make it clear that you can use it if you are already using it, and like not scare people off too much, but also not encourage new users, I think. So it'll be very precise wording. Go ahead, Gaussen.
Speaking of precise wording, one thing I don't know if it's clear from the discussion, documentation. Right now we have 3 modes. Operator is the same parity with the other 2. The goal would be to hide some of the documentation or put them in a separate site, or I don't know how we can mark it, but it's not only this operator mode. There are all kind of, we have command line parameters documented on the site for auto completion of pilot agent, or a lot of features fit in the same category where we do not really want to maintain to support them long term. We don't want people to use them, but because we documented them and we have them, we need to keep maintaining them, but hide them from documentation to prevent further use of them. Especially if we want to make architectural changes and like Louis discussed in the previous meetings with micro proxies or other things that because the API surface is huge. I mean, that's really the problem.
I mean, we can have a very long deprecation, right? If we were clear about it in advance. Right, instead of our normal, like the fastest you can deprecate something is, depending on the feature status, right, up to 1 year, right, for something that is marked stable. But we could actually go longer than that while still giving users the indication that eventually we do intend to get rid of this, right?
But I think the first problem is to stop the bleeding, basically, to stop, a lot of features, not only, this is just an example, but a lot of other things we kind of want people to stop using them and not be so prominently documented. That's my concern.
Yeah, I mean, we can do the other things like moving the documentation around, etc., right? That's fine. But I am wondering about what we should actually communicate as the long-term intent. Is maintenance mode just a way of saying a very long deprecation?
The cost is not huge to maintain it. I mean, it's just we have the same template. It's just it's relatively okay to keep it undeterministic, just like the virtual service. I mean, there's no need to scare people into deprecation.
I do think that it's probably largely the same. Like if we say we're going to deprecate in 2 years, or if we say it's in maintenance mode and then 1.5 years from now we say, okay, we're actually going to deprecate it in 6 months. It's the same end result, but the messaging to users is a bit different. And I think that when people see the word deprecated, they get scared. And I think that there's also confusion on what deprecated means, and different people interpret it as this is removed, this is not recommended and going to be removed, or just this is not recommended. So in many ways, I feel like maintenance mode is just hacking around that confusion rather than actually doing something completely new. I see all the time people like, it's deprecated, so I can't use it. And it's like, well, you can, you just shouldn't. Like they think it's removed.
Yeah, I mean, and some of the concern around deprecation is because we have deprecated, for instance, APIs that were in alpha or beta, right, in under 6 months, right? And then so that it would be reasonable for users to assume that I can't use that thing because in reality you can't for very long. Right? If deprecations were, 1 year or 2 years, right, then users would probably be a little less concerned. Right. Sven?
Lynn had her hand up first.
So
Okay, thank you, Stephen. So yeah, I have two comments. So first comment is maintenance mode. I do think it could be pretty confusing. I was just looking at to see if Kubernetes has a maintenance mode. I haven't been able to find it. I think it's another thing user would have to learn, unfortunately. So we have to be very clear on deprecation maintenance. I'm leaning towards not having a separate mode beyond deprecation at the moment. So that's point number one. Point number two is I saw Mitch just join. I was just looking at 1.9 upgrade survey. I don't see we have like percentage of how many users are using in cluster operator. I don't know if Mitch, you had any insights as far as you know how many users will be using and what are the percentage using in cluster operator.
No, we did not ask our users whether they were using the in-cluster operator or the operator on the command line. We might be able to get some of that data out of GKE. I'll need to take it to up my management chain for permission to share.
Do you guys think that would be any useful to pursue?
I think that I mean, I would be interested to know the data, but I'm not sure that it would actually change my opinion on the data, because we're not saying that we're going to remove it anytime soon, if ever. And I think we do, even if 50% of people are using it, we still want to discourage usage because we don't feel that they should be using it, right? And we're not saying that those 50% that are currently using it should stop using it. We just don't want any new users to use it unless they have a very, very, very good reason and understand the implications of that.
Do we have a page somewhere that, like, at the top of the documentation for it that says what they should do instead? Like, do we have that documented?
No, because right now we just say, here's our 3 install options, use any one you want. So this effort is basically adding that section that says, no, you probably shouldn't use the operator. You should do this because of XYZ. And if you really want to, you can do it, but here's the caveats.
Well, so I think we could separate that from the maintenance mode thing, right? We could discourage its use using a new mode that we haven't done for.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe we should have that first before like the maintenance and the deprecation, because that documentation that's missing is really, you know, users are confused, so they wouldn't know what to pick. So they could easily land within cluster operator without knowing the caveats and limitations.
Yeah, getting that feedback from the current user, finding out what's going on, and if they move and all that. Like, I think we need to do some more outreach.
What is the goal of the outreach, to find out if we should deprecate the operator or can keep it alive, or?
To, like, if we think it is using it now, like, oh yeah, I'm moving away from it, then yeah, we can totally deprecate it.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I would be very concerned specifically about saying, like, especially in 1.12 release notes, that a operator is deprecated, even if it's a 2-year deprecation or something. And then at the same time, we're going to have a section that's like, oh, Helm, we got new Helm repos. Like, Helm is great again. Like, the tweets just write themselves about, like, Istio flip-flopping between operator and Helm and operator. I don't think it would be a very good look for us. So I'm very against saying that the operator is deprecated in 1.12. We can do almost anything else, maintenance mode, or just not calling it a word, but deprecation is.
Yeah, I think pointing people towards alternatives and explaining why and talking to users and see if they are planning on moving or willing to move and starting to get that feedback. Yeah, I think that'll all help, feed if we think that that's the right approach. Eric has a hand.
Eric.
All right, so my only other side comment to this, actually had two, but the first one was we only have it listed as beta currently. So is that enough of a distraction without adding, the maintenance mode description? It's in beta. We could deprecate it within 3 months if we wanted to. Obviously, we don't. We want to let it live longer. But then that sort of leaves this long-running beta thing. And I know we've had this discussion to try to, promote features where, this one we're just sort of letting sit in beta for a while. So I don't know if that's enough of a distraction or a deterrent, I guess. But I was thinking between that and then the comment, that we might recommend something else without mentioning deprecation might be sufficient. But I'll leave that up to the TOC to figure out overall.
One more point is that Istio is turning itself into an operator. I mean, it's going to operate all the gateways, create gateway deployment and all the other stuff. So maybe deprecation of operator would be a bit premature because Istio will become the operator. And the API is a problem because operator API is the one that is mostly causing the process. It consists of mesh config, proxy config, and all the others. But I don't think deprecating the concept of operator it's a good idea.
All right. It sounds like we mostly have consensus clearly not to deprecate and to also not introduce a special new mode just because it would be confusing with respect to deprecation. But we are going to go and reorganize the docs to provide guidance.
Yeah, and if there's any data from GKE, I think it's a good reflection of the data, beyond GKE. So that would help us at least understand how much percentage of users are using this thing.
Yeah, I think whatever we call it, if we have like a red warning on the top of the operator page that it's not the recommended install, that'll go a long way in keeping new users from adopting it. So it'll kind of stop the bleeding there.
Okay, so the ask is for the working group to go take a look at all the pages that guide users through install flows and try and make sure we steer them in the right direction.
That sounds good to me. Sam, are you taking that on?
Yeah, I'll own this.
All right, cool. Does anyone have any other topics?
Just a PSA, the steering committee will be meeting to discuss the open TOC seat on Friday. So if you want to self-nominate, please contact a TOC member or a steering committee member. Probably the best way to do it is to go into Slack and to just note your interest in the TOC steering questions chat.
If no one has anything else, I did want to bring up something that Cost didn't mention. Let's see if I can reshare this. About Istio becoming an operator and what that was about, since I don't think we've mentioned this terribly broadly. This isn't necessarily something that we have, like a conflict we need to resolve with the TOC. I just wanted to bring it up to the TOC since it has pretty large implications. So historically, we have had, you install a gateway through Helm or Operator or whatever, and then you configure that gateway with a gateway resource, and those two are kind of decoupled, but they are actually quite coupled logically. Like you have to keep them in sync with the ports, etc. So with the new gateway API, there's been a lot of movement towards having the actual gateway resource represent the underlying infrastructure, both in obviously out of cluster implementations like the GKE one, for example. You create a gateway and it provisions a load balancer for you. And you just get an IP address and the status, and you call that, and everything kind of works with one resource. But also in cluster implementations like Istio have also been moving to this model where creating a gateway resource also provisions some proxy running inside the cluster to handle the traffic. And so the idea would be that Istio would do the same, in that if you created some resource like this, for example, you would automatically under the hood get some service that's exposing these ports, and you get an Envoy deployment with whatever config we need to run the deployment. And that way we're kind of abstracting the fact that we have this deployment and service in the cluster, and the users can more think about the feature set they need in the gateway API. They don't have to worry about keeping things in sync, etc. So this is not terribly complicated. Obviously, we're just turning one resource into two effectively, but it does represent a kind of large shift in kind of the API model. So I want to kind of bring that up if there's any concerns or questions or anything.
So John, is this mostly for app dedicated gateway? What about like shared gateway across different namespace for different app?
I would say no, it's not mostly for that. I would say that it is even better for those users, because if you have more of them, then making something, like if you do something 100 times and it's easier, then it's a lot better than something you do once that's easier. But that doesn't mean it's not still useful for if you have a shared one. Like for example, in our east-west gateway install guide, it's a lot of steps, right? Like that whole guide would be replaced with like a 10-line YAML file like this, essentially. Same with like on the ingress and egress docs, we can just say deploy a gateway, and we just give them this YAML. We don't have to go say, go to the install docs and then pick your install method and then configure these parameters and then configure a gateway and then make sure the port's open. It's it's quite a bit more work. So I don't know. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. I guess one related question I have is, so let's say if I have this gateway input on your left side, what if later on, I decided I'm going to poke up another port, maybe with a different protocol on my gateway, and it could be maybe I support an additional host name.
Yeah.
Now, would you perform an upgrade to the service and deployment?
Yep. So if I change this to say like this is now 1.2.3.5, then the service would also update, or same if I added a port. So they're kept in sync. And so if you want to add a new port, it's very simple. Whereas today you have to update two things, which, I mean, granted, updating two things is not that hard, but it still actually causes a lot of pain for users. And developers.
Yeah.
I know that you and I have both struggled with that in the past, when it's not very obvious why something's not working and you realize like the ports are out of sync or something annoying like that. Yeah. It especially makes the docs really hard too, because despite the fact that it's just updating one port in a service, it's actually sometimes quite hard, depending on how you install, to change that port easily.
Yeah, totally. If no one else have a comment, another question I have is, I guess this means your gateway resource must reside in the same namespace as your gateway deployments, which today we recommend people to do, especially when you have TLS.
Yeah, so that requirement is already, with a new API, that's already a requirement regardless of if we do this.
Okay.
So one thing I should clarify too, this is one option, and it's the default, but there's also an option that a gateway can point to an existing service in deployment if they want to manage it manually. This kind of mirrors like something that a out of cluster implementation like GKE would do, where you can point to an existing provision load balancer IP. So very similar concept there. So while we expect most people to do this, if they don't like it or they need to migrate from an old install or whatever, then they can opt out.
Yeah, makes sense.
All right, thanks for listening. If there's no other topics, we can probably end a bit early.
Yeah, sounds good to me.
Right.
Yeah, thanks
See you all.
everyone.
Yep.
Well,
All right.